Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexi the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. We're back again after a bit of a hiatus there that was sort of semi-unintentional. So we got to apologize for going radio silence there for a minute.
We got the European vacation fever.
Yeah, exactly. Except I was working the whole time, pretty much.
That's true. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
So Alexi's in Greece, and I've just been in Finland. I was in Finland for about 2 weeks, or just shy of 2 weeks. Reporting an article on S Group, their cooperative retail company. Sort of like the article I wrote on the Faroes last year, the Faroe Islands and their tax system. But yeah, then I was in Greece for a bit, getting rained on with Alexi.
Ryan and I were braving the Medicane, right? Like the Mediterranean hurricane together on a boat, actually.
Yeah, we got a piece of that thing that hit Libya and caused the terrible flooding, apparently. And that's
in northern Greece, and flooded northern Greece to
that too.
A 1 in 300 year climate event, right?
Yeah, supposedly. It's more like a 1 in 3 years now. Yeah, we just sort of ran out of time there, and it was just too much scrambling to sit down and record. But now we're back in the saddle, and yeah, maybe we'll do a catch up episode or two over the next week or so.
We hope while we were away, you all had the opportunity to relax in some capacity as well. But don't worry, there will be plenty of hashtag content coming.
That's right.
Starting with where in the world has Ryan Cooper been, which you just answered. But this is, remember the where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Some of you are too young for that reference.
Yeah,
but we could do that with you, because you are a world traveler now, doing the global international journalism about places that do things better than we do.
Yeah. I did used to watch that show, actually, when I was a kid.
Did you?
75 years ago. Yeah, before we get to that, though.
Like a game as well? They made a video game or something too, right?
Oh, yeah. It was a whole, whole content platform, IP. I'm surprised they haven't done Carmen Sandiego Expanded Universe yet. We could have Carmen Sandiego TV
parallel
show.
Universes.
Yeah. Crossover with like Venom or Batman, maybe Tony Stark. Tony Stark tracks down
missed opportunities.
Yeah, that could be pretty good. Iron Man.
You could get Where's Waldo could be involved.
Yeah. Marvel, Star Wars, Mattel Cinematic Toy Universe, and
which universe is Waldo in? You have to find the universe. It's like
exactly.
Okay,
but
we digress.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. Before we start talk about Finland a little bit, we got to remind everyone, as usual. The Left Anchor is sponsored by the American Prospect Magazine. And bonus episodes that we put out typically every other week. It's $5 a month. $10 a month will get you a digital subscription to the magazine, plus a discounted print subscription. I got to catch up on a couple.
Plus all the episodes as well.
Yeah, plus bonus episodes. Otherwise, we appreciate any type of support. Rate, review. Send to your friends, and
the iTunes reviews, especially, they warm the cockles of our heart. I also hope they attract more listeners, but they at least make us feel really happy inside. And as lefties, that's important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I can give you a little bit of background on this Finland thing. I don't want to scoop myself as usual. This article will be coming out
when's it coming out? You've got the Prospect is publishing your piece, as is Matt Brunig, right?
Yeah, and that'll be in a few weeks. So we go to press a week from next Friday. So and after that, once the issues go out, then we'll publish the articles online, drip them out one by one as well.
All right. So no scooping yourself, but now you're going to tell us everything that you couldn't put in the article. So that's even better.
Yeah. Just a little bit of background on, S Group, which is quite a peculiar institution. It's Finland's enormous cooperative retailer. It has a bunch of the main thing it does is grocery stores. It's got a hypermarket, the Prisma. It's got a sort of mid-sized grocery store, S-Market, a small grocery store, a Sala.
Hyper? What is that term? Hang on. What does hypermarket mean?
That's a European. You should know that. That's a European lingo for like a Walmart, like a giant, with clothing and electronics.
It's like an Uber.
Yeah.
Uber store.
The Uber, yeah. The Uber store.
It's the Ubermensch of... it breaks through. It transcends all norms.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually toured one of these things. It was enormous. It's your classic warehouse, like airplane hangar sized store with
like a Costco.
Yeah, like Costco. Yeah. And, and everything from a giant party speaker to 700 different types of deli meat or 7,000 different types of yogurt. Apparently, dairy is a big business in Finland. And fake, I guess a lot of Finns are lactose intolerant. So there's all sorts of milk substitute type of, apparently, according to the European Union, you can't call it milk if it doesn't have milk in it. You can't call it oat milk.
Go figure.
It has to be oat drink or whatever the fuck. But yeah, just shelf after shelf of this stuff. The selection is unbelievable. And yeah, they control almost half the grocery market in Finland. That would relative to the size of the economy, that's twice as big as Walmart, which is the biggest grocery store in the U.S. by a huge margin. It's got 13.5 billion euros in revenue last year, 41,000 employees. So it's a big company.
And that's comparable to Trader Joe's, roughly, something like that?
Yeah, in absolute size, it's about the same. It's about the size of Trader Joe's. So, it's not a global multinational company exactly. But, Trader Joe's is
But for Finland,
yeah,
legit.
Relative, Finland's population is only 5.6 million people. So, that's a very size, one of the biggest companies in Finland. And, that was part of the context that I learned there is that Finland is kind of the cooperative country. There's cooperatives, in timber. The biggest timber company is a cooperative. The biggest bank, OP Bank, is a cooperative. And, there's more cooperative members than there are residents of Finland. So people have multiple memberships and things.
Okay, so maybe we should explain what a cooperative is and the different types, because some people might think that just means people are really friendly with each other and they really coordinate well and they're collaborative. But it has to do with ownership of the firm, of the entity, right?
Yeah. So there are basically two types of cooperatives. You have your producer cooperative, which there's actually a fair number of these in the United States, Blue Diamond Almonds is a cooperative. They have 3,000 grower owners in their cooperative. And it's like a sort of joint, purchasing and sales operation for a whole bunch of different people at the same time. So rather than, you, the individual almond farmer, having to go out into the market by yourself and sell your products to whoever, to Walmart probably, you have a big sort of representative institution, and it gives you, more market leverage and a lot of ancillary services that help, it's just makes your business, operations easier and more profitable, I guess I would say.
And that's interesting, because that definition of producer cooperative is slightly different from a worker cooperative, because the workers in each individual producer farm for almonds or whatever do not own, right? Is that because they are run as a kind of normal company, but then that company is itself a cooperative owner in the aggregate kind of company that creates the almonds or sells the almonds for Blue, right? Which is different from like a collective where all of the workers involved from, Alpha to Omega are cooperatively owning it.
Right.
Or is it something more complicated than that? Is that right? Or what?
Yeah. So, right. I should say there's three types of them. The producer cooperative. So you have your individual farmers, and then they sort of own their own farms, but then they also collectively own this central institution that sort of just does coordinating functions for all the folks, the farmer owners. And a worker cooperative would be like an individual company in which the workers own the company itself. And there's a fair number of those also in the United States. They tend to be pretty small. It's like King Arthur Flour, I think, is a worker co-op, legally speaking. I think New Belgium Brewing is worker owned. And, that's that gives you a sort of different flavor on things, but that's like, profits go back to the, workers on a basis of, how many shares you might own in the company, I suppose. You could set these up. There's lots of different sort of little variations. But S Group is a consumer co-op. People have probably seen these. There's a lot of little bitty grocery stores. There's one, near in Philadelphia, near where we used to live in West Philly.
Yeah, West Philly.
Yeah, called Mariposa, which is that's where, the people who shop at the store rather than the workers, but the shoppers, they buy a membership and they, legally speaking, own the institution. So REI is legally a consumer co-op as well. And, that there's a lot of variations on those two. It kind of depends on implementation in some ways. I looked into REI a bit for the article, and I don't think it's correct to say that the co-op structure is totally fraudulent, but it is sort of fake, in the sense that, part of the way that a consumer co-op especially is supposed to be set up is that, the ownership has to be meaningful in terms of control. You don't just have like a piece of paper, like you could vote to replace the management. And the way REI is set up, the current members of the board get to select the nominees for the board elections, and turnout is like 1 or less than 1% usually. Because why would you vote? You have no choice. They select the candidates for you. And so, it's basically, in terms of like brass tacks, it's really more of a sort of like, regular supermarket benefits program where you get a discount, or store credit for.
So that's key, because a lot of people might think of a cooperative that's a consumer cooperative mostly in terms of like the cost savings to you, like the kickback you get, the kind of dividend, or a share in the profits that you get that reduces your spending there. But what you're kind of suggesting is there's something that's even more meaningful, and that's actual control of the governance, which depends on how it's set up. And REI is a good example because in absolute terms, that's also a comparable size in terms of revenue and employees and such to S Group, right?
It's actually quite a bit smaller than S Group. It's only...
Oh, interesting.
It's same order of magnitude ish. Their sales were about like $3.7 billion last year.
Oh yeah. Okay. So it's like 10 billion less. Yeah. In sales. Right.
Yeah. And so the euro and the dollar are almost 1-to-1 at the moment. But yeah, so I think that you see the difference in the governance structure. I
guess I forgot about that because of how much more the CEO gets paid at REI. So I forgot.
Yeah,
it's a different,
The S Group doesn't have like an overall CEO because it's like an organization of these 19 different regional cooperatives, and so like each one elects like a governing council. It's quite a complicated structure, and then those councils they elect like a supervisory board and then a CEO of the cooperative. And then those cooperatives, they nominate like a representative to be on the board of SOK, which is a Finnish word. It's just like a sort of central organizing institution of all the regional cooperatives. And that's like the CEO of SOK, like the centralized like service provider and coordinating body for S Group as a whole. That's sort of like the closest thing you get to a CEO, but it's not a real CEO of all of S Group because like it just doesn't work like that. And this guy last year made, let me look it up here. 1.1 million euros. Whereas the CEO of REI got, in 2021, which is the last year that I could find numbers, $4.6 million. So like more than 4 times as much money in a business that's like 1/4 the size of,
right.
And this, you would have to assume, I mean, it's partly American context, lower taxes and stuff like that. It's because the board, it's sort of like a nonprofit hospital, you could say, where it's like, we don't have any formal profits in an accounting sense, but all of our executives have a similar level of control and they get tons and tons and tons of money, just because they control the way that the organization runs and the members, the ordinary members. I'm a member of REI. Never once have I received any sort of information about how you vote. I didn't know that. I didn't know when the elections are, how frequent they are. And it turns out they're totally meaningless. Why bother? It doesn't make any, there's no choice. So.
Whereas with the S Group, it represents, first of all, the number of Finns who are members of S Group as customers or consumers, you write, represents 78% of households in Finland. So that's like a huge amount of Finland are members. And 25% of them tend to vote, right, in these S Group. Is that right?
In the regional elections, they said that the turnout for these cooperative elections is about 25%. Which is, that's staggering. There are a lot of off-year elections to be like mayor of big cities and shit that don't even come close to 25% turnout. And it reflects the fact, people. I wouldn't say there's not like a competitive elections, with like different ideological parties that are sort of like everyone basically agrees what the point of the organization is. But, you have these elections with the purpose of sort of like, people generally getting involved in the management of the organization. And it tends to be also, that there's a lot of recruiting internally. It's like a whole big culture of people. I talked to the deputy CEO of SOK, and he told me he started his career there in 1994, I think. He's just made it his entire life's work. And, it's just a place where you can, you can rise through the ranks. And, a lot of these SOK, executives, they have like specialized training, and whatnot. They come out of business schools and stuff like that because it's quite a difficult operation to manage. I think, it's a lot of complicated logistics, but
sure.
It's like there's an element of genuine democracy. And I would say that's what really separates like a real co-op versus some kind of fake, sort of branding exercise.
Yeah, no, I'd like to get into how, because on the face of it, you think about it and it's like, okay, it's different from American companies that give you kind of frequent flyer miles or various discounts. Okay, there's meaningful democratic governance involved. But I think the differences don't end there. And at some point we should play this clip that's going around the social media lately of this CEO of a property development company, right? Who is kind of like worse than Mr. Burns in The Simpsons, right? And just really clarifies the kind of nature of the class war. Because I'm curious about how that kind of mentality and that kind of typifying ideological expression of capital's view of the function of business and the function of capitalism vis-a-vis owners and managers versus the workers, how that differs in social democratic countries like Finland, and the situation that we've got here. Because, you write about some interesting dynamics relating to the workers, the owners, the customers, the country, civic pride and civic nationalism, maybe. So we can get into all that, but is this where we should play the clip or something?
Yeah.
What
we could. Property developer and CEO Tim Gurner. We'll put that in.
I think the problem that we've had is that we have people decided they didn't really want to work so much anymore through COVID, and that has had a massive issue on productivity. Tradies have definitely pulled back on productivity. They have been paid a lot to do not too much in the last few years, and we need to see that change. We need to see unemployment rise. Unemployment has to jump 40, 50%, in my view. We need to see pain in the economy. We need to remind people that they work for the employer, not the other way around. I mean, there's been a systematic change where employees feel the employer is extremely lucky to have them, as opposed to the other way around. So it's a dynamic that has to change. We've got to kill that attitude, and that has to come through hurting the economy, which is what the whole global, the world is trying to do. The governments around the world are trying to increase unemployment to get that to some sort of normality. And we're seeing it. I think every employer now is seeing it. I mean, there is definitely massive layoffs going off. People might not be talking about it, but people are definitely laying people off, and we're starting to see less arrogance in the employment market, and that has to continue because that will cascade across the cost balance.
This is an expression of, political domination. This is like the authoritarian nature of capitalism, just laid out straight up. He's saying, we need to remind people that they work for the employer, not the other way around. And, the natural question is why? What gives you the right?
Yeah.
Why should you?
Hey, asshole, what are you providing anyone?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It reminded me, I think we've probably mentioned this before on the podcast, but there's a famous essay by Mikhail Kaletsky about why capitalists don't like full employment. And he says, quote, we have considered the political reasons for the opposition to the policy of creating employment by government spending. But even if this opposition were overcome, the maintenance of full employment would cause social and political changes, which would give a new impetus to the opposition of the business leaders. Indeed, under a regime of permanent full employment, the sack would cease to play its role as a disciplinary measure. The social position of the boss would be undermined, and the self-assurance and class consciousness of the working class would grow. Strikes for wage increases and improvements in conditions of work would create political tension. It is true that profits would be higher under a regime of full employment than they are on average under laissez-faire, and even the rise in wage rates resulting from the stronger bargaining power of the workers is less likely to reduce profits than to increase prices, and thus adversely affects only the rentier interests. But discipline in the factories and political stability are more appreciated than profits by business leaders. Their class instinct tells them that lasting full employment is unsound from their point of view, and that unemployment is an integral part of the normal capitalist system. That's just
boom.
Central casting.
There
That guy wrote that in 1943.
Yeah. Still true. And you see that from this guy's quote. But besides that, the glaring cruelty of, hey, we need to discipline the workforce by turning up unemployment 40%, 50%, and his admission that there's a kind of tacit conspiracy that this is already happening. And I don't know if he has in mind the Fed, but he definitely has in mind all the massive layoffs that are happening. And he's kind of suggesting that these layoffs are not necessary or even necessarily related to profit motive thinking, but instead, we see workers getting a little arrogant about how important they are, getting a little power, going on strike, asking for more. We need, and so the words like arrogance that he throws around, and the words like they think that they are more deserving or they should be in charge. That is the key to his whole, point that it's, not about what's the best strategy. Because when you did your S Group interview, there was a lot of discussion about like economic growth, sustainability, market share, all these typical capitalist economic terms, right? Which is interesting because here, this is not what this guy's talking about. He's not talking about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? What do you think? It's an interesting contrast.
No, I think, again, I don't want to get into it too closely, but I think that Finnish society is just profoundly different than American society when it comes to this type of thinking on the part of the sort of business class writ large. And S Group's an example of that insofar as like you have a big operation that's like, taking in tons of money, but pretty much most of the profits go back out to the member owners. You don't have a billionaire, single, the net worth of all the Walmart, the majority ownership, which is all the Walton family members. There's like 7 of them that are still alive. It's like $250 billion. And that's when you organize like a private company like this, where you have like the legal ownership stakes that are, concentrated in a small handful of people, like the money just flows directly to them and they get, tremendous political leverage from their wealth. And it instills in them a sense of, a class instinct. And the idea that, I deserve to rule and that I need to, dominate like my workforce to maintain my position at the top of the heap. And,
that's the thing. I would you say that it's fundamentally that the wealth is for the power and not vice versa? It's not that the power is there to get you the wealth. It's that the wealth production system is there to instantiate the kind of hierarchy of rule of who has the power to determine who does what.
Yeah.
And who gets to say who does what.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, certainly very wealthy people do enjoy like a luxurious lifestyle. But when you're talking about someone who's got like even $1 billion, like that is more.
What's the difference in terms of wealth? They don't even notice, right? 1, 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion, like,
Yeah, at that point, you're just keeping score. I mean, that's more or less more money than anybody could ever spend, unless you're just like buying social media companies and running them into the ground like Elon Musk. He potentially, I could see him wasting $200 billion. But yeah, I think at their key priority, as John Gant says, it's to borrow a term from South African apartheid, baaskap, which is an Afrikaans word. It just means bosses on top, like literally.
That's right.
And this guy, the fact that maybe this guy sort of tacitly understands, even if he may deny it to himself, that in fact the workers are like they do the work. They make the business function on a day-to-day basis. Maybe, the CEO makes some important decisions here and there, but does he deserve is he worth 300 times as much as a normal employee and all of them put together? No, of course he isn't.
I mean, it's a question. It's a question whether he, she, or they are worth anything, let alone multipliers of the average worker. It's unclear that they're worth what the average worker is worth. To be honest.
You can certainly point to instances in which like entrepreneurs have like set up companies. Like they've taken decisions to like get the business rolling. But,
sure.
When it comes to really large enterprise, like at a certain point, it's about like the whole structure of the thing and the millions of working hours that are put into the business from all the employees. And in the case of like a lot of very wealthy shareholders, like the Walton family, they don't do anything. They hire a CEO to run the company on their behalf. These people aren't involved in like picking what brands of peanut butter go on the shelves at every Walmart in the world. Like they're just sitting at the top doing nothing and collecting, absolutely obscene quantities of resources and potential resources. And that gives them, political command over society as a whole.
I mean, that the whole meme from Arrested Development about how much could a banana cost, Michael? $10. The whole point of that meme kind of relates well to like ownership of a grocery store, right? Because by definition, this separation in capitalism, where those who own don't necessarily have to know anything about the business and how it's run, right, is what's new. Like it used to be that like the people who owned their own fruits of their labor, right? Of course, they were the ones that produced and knew best about the industry in which they're involved. But then when you get the separation, anyone can be an owner. You don't have to qualify for that with your knowledge of what's going on, right? And so that whole point about the clueless kind of capitalist class is that they're not really involved in the production and the management. And to the extent that like some well-paid management executives know the industry, right? They're in this weird in-between where they're kind of like workers who are paid so well that they align with the capitalist class, right? But to go back to Finland for a minute, right? This mentality wouldn't make sense so much in Finland, especially with regard to S Group, because the way that they've set up the co-op is that capital accumulation is not the goal, right? It can't be. And also, I think you point out, the Finnish tax system doesn't incentivize making such a disparate amount of money because it's just going to be taxed anyway. So there are different kind of goals and forms of prestige that you can have. But, it's not the same as the US, right? Where you can be, one of the richest people in the world, and that could be your kind of form of social prestige and power. So if that's not available, you have to have other things that you're going for. That could be collective goals that could have to do with civic pride, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this was, one of the big objectives of the cooperative movement back when it started in the, very late 19th century, early 20th century. Back then, people may remember, Finland was a colony of the Russian Empire, and under Nicholas II, starting in 1898, there was a policy of Russification. Basically, they're trying to do sort of quiet cultural genocide on Finland, force everyone to speak Russian, increase, Russian domination. He was really all-time prick for the ages, Nicholas II, just complete shithead and also terribly incompetent. But
it's a good reminder though that civic pride can be a response to imperialist aggressors, right?
Yeah, and the point was that so we're going to set up economic institutions that are under the control of like the broad mass of the Finnish population. That at the same time, because industrialization is starting to happen. Around this time, Finland was late industrializing, by the way. It was pretty far behind the other Nordics, up until, like the 1970s or so. But yeah, so you have like incipient industrialization and people looking at like, handfuls of capitalists becoming super wealthy while everyone else is stuck in poverty. And they're like, well, that's not great. And so one logical response, led by this fella named, Gebhardt and his wife, it's like, let's create a sort of capitalist style business, but it can be collectively owned by everybody who shops at the business, or do the worker co-ops or the producer co-ops or whatever. But the point being that this will be under our control as Finns. It will be for us, and also it won't blow up the huge fortunes on behalf of a tiny minority of people. Like the profits, the revenues, the economic activity and all that stuff will remain within like the sort of the broad mass of the Finnish population. And, more or less it was successful. I mean, in fact, this is part, again, part of the article, go into it in more detail, but like, back in the 1990s, they had only like 15% of the grocery market. And then they, got their shit together and now it's almost half. Like they beat the capitalists at their own game. You can have a business run by, a guy who's making like a lot of money. He's making in the millions of euros a year. Like that's a good salary. People maybe even argue it's too much. but it's a lot less than like Elon Musk, and you don't get any stock or anything like that. And that's where the real wealth comes from, when you have these ownership claims over these vast institutions. Those don't exist. You can't buy stock in S Group. And in fact, it's legally forbidden. You can't take outside investment from capitalists. It's against the law. And it works perfectly well. You don't need this incredibly authoritarian structure necessarily to have a successful economic enterprise that works in the market.
And not only that, the reason it succeeds so well is not by screwing over the workers necessarily, like you do at Amazon, but by cutting the cost of the products. Because if you are owning it collectively as the consumers, what are you going to do? You're going to be like, hey, I think the things we buy should cost less, right? And so like that is going to get you to shop at that place because the prices are really good. And if you don't need to accumulate capital that doesn't redound back to, the workers or the consumers, but is captured by the owners, then that's a lot of money to play with to reduce prices, right?
Yeah. Well, and you could, theorize, a cooperative in which like the workers, one way you compete on price is just by cutting wages down to the absolute lowest possible level. But that's where the unions come in. And I think that's a broader, the broader Finnish context with the labor movement and mass unionization just like changes the whole structure of society. It's
unions and the welfare state together. Right? Yeah,
exactly. And so most of the S Group workers are unionized, and that basically it has become a sort of social consensus that there's a minimum, that you have to pay, on the order of like the base bottom pay is something like €12.50 an hour. That's the minimum you can make. And if you stay on for years, you can get raises. If you work at night, you make like 50% more. If you work in the weekend, you make like 50% more again. So lots of people like to work on Sundays because you get double pay. Not a great salary, certainly.
No, it's low. Yeah.
But enough to live on, in the context of Finland, which is, prices are high, but welfare benefits are also very high. And
those minimum wage workers are also getting health benefits, not just from the state, but from S Group as well, right?
You have your baseline, guaranteed of all your basic care from the government. And then S Group has like a special sort of like, additional health, system that you can sort of like urgent care that's just for S Group employees. And so, their big innovation was just to like set up a cutting edge logistics and management system that, running, you just have to imagine running a grocery store the size of one of these Prisma operations with like, I don't know, like 20,000 different products in there. Like that is a big pain in the neck, in terms of, managing your inventory and making sure the shelves are stocked and all that sort of thing. And they just managed to do it really well. It's a very efficient enterprise, and they're really proud, of how efficient it was, even though, a lot of these guys that were centrally involved with, setting it up like that, they didn't really see much of the benefits at all. It was just, on behalf of basically everyone in the country, just about 78%.
And not only that, but the ethos seems to be real in part because it's owned by the consumers, and there's this kind of civic nationalism attached to it, right? Because the suppliers for like the farmers tends to be Finnish farmers, and there seems to be this kind of ethos that although you point out that S Group can be a hard negotiator maybe sometimes. There's a kind of limit to that because you can't screw over the Finnish industries that are supplying you and that are connected to the overall economy. There's this kind of interdependence going on. Unlike, I think, in the States where, every company or every industry is out for itself a little bit. There's a kind of web that's woven, it seems like, where that limits the kind of, the greed and the kind of, taking advantage of profit motive incentives and such, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this is what happened in the 1980s through the early 2000s when, we had all these free trade agreements, and the capitalists would immediately box up their entire factories and ship them to Mexico or Vietnam or China or anywhere where labor could be exploited more ruthlessly, basically. They didn't give a shit about the American people. It was all about money. And, the idea that like it could create like political problems down the road if we just like write off giant chunks of the Rust Belt, like, oh, I wonder if that's going to create a populist demagogue or help create one in 20 years. Nah, fuck it. Money now.
Yeah. Not part of the calculus. That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so S Group being mainly, by the way, I should mention, it's not just grocery stores. They also have a department store. They have hotels and restaurants. I ate at a couple of the restaurants there. They're fine. They're not that good, but it's like a
serviceable.
Yeah, it's like a sort of B plus chain restaurant. Just
you're not dining in Provence. Okay.
Yeah,
fair enough.
It's not that kind of a place. It's not like super luxurious.
But I bet it's high quality. I bet it's locally sourced and it's organic and high quality.
Yeah. Well, see, S Group,
even if it's not,
they get about 80% of their food from Finland. And, that's important because the broad Finnish society has like a broad ethic going back, like probably well over a century now, that it's important to have domestic food supplies. There was a terrible famine in the 1860s, the last famine in Northern Europe, killed like 8% of the population. And so, the people like to buy food that's from the country. And then at the same time, the government also regards, domestic food supplies like a national security priority, that they're looking at Russia. They just joined NATO for obvious reasons. And they're looking at Russia blowing up the Ukrainian like grain export terminals and even their like stockpiles of harvests from over the last year. And they're like, well, we need to have domestic control. And then also, as I was sort of mentioning before, the dairy farmers are in a giant co-op, like 85% of the dairy market. Meat growers, eggs. Those are two other co-ops. The eggs, in fact, there's a requirement. You can't import eggs to Finland because they don't have any salmonella, and they don't want to have any salmonella. So you couldn't, you can't exterminate your egg farmers, and get them from like Mexico or whatever, because that would be illegal. And so, yeah, they're sort of hemmed in, and they don't want to be seen as the company that drove everyone out of business to cut prices by a nickel. And yeah, I think it's just part and parcel of the whole ethic of Finnish, the sort of social solidarity. This is a cooperative, political enterprise as well. That we're sort of all in this together, at least to some degree, and we should, where possible, work together to make a good society that benefits everybody at the same time. And yeah, you don't need people like, what's his name, the jackass from before, Tim Gurner. Those types of people, you can do without them. It is not necessary to live like that. You can have a wealthy, productive economy without the wealthy capitalists lording it over everyone else.
Right. And it reminds me now, of course, if I was Finnish and in Finland, I would still want to radicalize as much as possible and try to move politics left and all that. So this is not the utopia, whatever, but it just highlights the differences, as we've talked about with, David Dean and each other before. Even within capitalism, how markets are structured really matters. And yes. Within, right, there are so many vast differences in terms of power, and it's important to explore those, because on the way to whatever future we hope we can transform to, there are paths that we need to understand that are already existing that we can go down, and Finland offers some of them, right? And it's kind of like we were talking about at some point, hanging out lately in Greece, the difference between the loyal opposition politically, where you have two different parties and there are important differences. But it's not the same thing as Trump and the fascists who are literally trying to destroy the fabric of democracy and democratic institutions and should be seen as enemies, or someone who is like a self-described Nazi, right? Who doesn't believe in the very foundations of this country, right? And the ideals of democracy and freedom and equality, and therefore doesn't need to be treated on equal terms in terms of debating ideas and so forth. I think it's similar to like that clown, who is talking about obviously using his power and capitalists using their power to oppress and discipline workers and cause suffering. That's an enemy. That's a class enemy. And I think that's a little bit different than a situation where you have like functionally the S Group kind of operates like a nonprofit, where, there is not a capital accumulation situation and there is disparity in wealth and there is a power differential. Yeah. And there are negotiations and there is a kind of class battle going on. But I think it's fundamentally different in how it functions within the polity, within a social democratic state. Like there is something healthy that you can work within going on in a country like Finland because of how things are set up and structured in that way. That is like so different than the States or places where, the guillotine seems more reasonable as a response, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just, I don't know. It's all capitalism, but it seems like that is unfair to the differences to just label them the same, right? I don't know. Yeah.
It's I would say, on the political point, it is. I think you see the value of having these sorts of like institutions around, very, very strong welfare state, cooperative societies, and so on. It disciplines the conservatives because like the conservative coalition won the last election by a hair.
The True Finns, right? True Finns.
Yeah, they were the second biggest party. The biggest one was like the center right party.
I gotta admit, True Finns, it sounds racist, Ryan. That sounds like a racist name.
They are pretty racist, which was, actually it was like going through like old writings of some of these True Finns ministers, and they're like pretty racist, and that actually caused a scandal, as opposed to the person just like getting more famous and wealthy. So yeah, I mean, you don't want to downplay like the fact that like there are conservative elements in Finnish society. There are conservative elements in every society. I don't think you could ever get rid of that permanently. Trying to do so would be worse. We saw that happen in the Soviet Union, which in fact itself became quite conservative in many ways. But what it makes it so that the sort of bounds of politics are closer, to the middle of the 50-yard line, so to speak. And, it's a right-wing coalition, I would say. That's probably a fair conclusion. But I think that there's no sense whatsoever that they're going to try to overthrow the government, They're going to try to,
or they're also not going to try to fundamentally undermine like what has made Finland's number one in education, so successful in ways that are fundamentally tied to like social democracy. Like they might try to pick at the edges of it, right? But like, I don't know. You tell me that they are hemmed in a little bit at what they can try to do to undermine what are fundamentally kind of socialistic ways of life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think they won because of inflation and because of the Russian war. And that's caused, that's a lot of sort of, people are fearful and vote for right wing parties when that happens. But yeah, it's like what do conservative parties do in basically every circumstance? They make things worse. Like that's pretty much the sum total. It's a hierarchy. Ideology of hierarchy. You try to make society more hierarchical, take from the poor and give to the rich. Right. But there's so much to take, and all those things are so widely beneficial that it's very unpopular to take them away. There's, what they do want to do is they want to roll back labor rights in Finland. They want to apparently get rid of the right to sympathy strikes, like Taft-Hartley did in the U.S. in 1947. And by all accounts, that could be a big battle. There could be a lot of strikes this fall when the parliament comes back from recess.
Well, and this is a point I want to make about the vicious and virtuous circles, right? Because when that asshole CEO was talking, right, it reminds me that like labor power and social progress isn't at its height when things are terrible. Because this guy understands the worse that unemployment is, the more reactionary politics can be. And the easier it is for people like him to stay in power and grow in wealth. Whereas like in Finland, for example, or in places where you've made a lot of progress, as you say, people see how good they have it, and they are more protective of what the state has ensured for them and the laws that prohibit the kind of, terrible expropriation by the capitalists. And so it's not that like, great reforms or revolution come from people that are desperate. When people are desperate, it's even easier to take advantage of them. And that's the vicious circle, right? And that's why the States is so terrible, because it's so easy to pit people against each other and take advantage of people being desperate. And they don't have the energy or will or wealth or time to fight. But the more that you've developed like these kind of social democratic reforms, the more that you've continued a tradition of bolstering public goods, the harder it is for the elites to fight against the public good, I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And on the question of this, sort of boring, like managing markets and maybe shooting for like revolutionary reforms while sort of doing as best you can in the moment. I think one thing that's
non-reformist reforms, maybe. Yeah.
I think one thing that's quite important about S Group is how important like technical competence is to achieving basically anything good. The Soviet Union, the Soviet economy in the 1920s, it was sort of like, I forget who made this comparison at first, but it was like a bunch of radicals like took over a plane, shot the pilot, and they were like, okay, we'll figure out how to fly it on the way down to the ground. And the result was a massive fucking famine. And in part because hardly anybody in the Soviet bureaucracy knew what the fuck they were talking about when it came to detailed, boring ass technical subjects like agriculture, metallurgy, all these sorts of things, engineering. They did eventually develop a pretty competent, technocracy in some ways, though there was also lots of it controlled by absolute cranks like Lysenko, if folks remember that guy. He didn't believe in genetics. And sort of ran Soviet agriculture for like 15 years. But yeah, it's like you can have all the utopian projects you want, but like it's any sort of complicated apparatus like that. It's gonna the management of it is going to be absolutely central to achieving it. You can have all the great ideas, but if you can't, fucking get your spreadsheets out and figure out how to get your shipment of grain from this place to that place in time before it goes bad, or, any of the tens of thousands of other little tasks that would be required in any sort of, even a modest size, sort of economic enterprise. You failed,
which is valorizing a different kind of thing than what we valorize when we valorize like the Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos of the world, right? Who, maybe they know some technical things here and there, but mostly are who they are because of luck, circumstance, and influence, and their self-aggrandizing has nothing to do with competence and everything to do with ego, right? As we've seen with Musk and Twitter, very obviously.
Yeah, public relations. I mean, I mentioned this in a previous episode when you were gone, in fact, but there's a great book called Ludicrous by Edward Niedermeyer. It's all about the rise of Tesla. And he basically makes the argument that with respect to Tesla, at least, maybe SpaceX is a different story, but with respect to Tesla, Elon Musk is and always has been basically a fraud and a con man, selling the idea of this, like, this greatest, most technically advanced cars ever. We're going to get to Mars. We're going to fix climate change. We're going to make all these crazy utopian dreams. And his execution is terrible. You know, the people like S Group managers be horrified at the quality control in Tesla automobiles. Their panel gaps are shit. Their reliability is shit. Their service availability, their service centers, there are not nearly enough of them all over the country. He's selling people this lie, this dream that this is the best possible car you could own. And it was just the fact that electric drivetrains are much simpler than gas-powered ones that led him to make a sort of minimum viable product, a thing that for most people works most of the time. But it's a low-quality thing. He can't execute because he doesn't know what he's doing when it comes to advanced manufacturing. He hires a bunch of people who do, and that's sort of like allowed Tesla to sort of like blunder into profitability, so to speak. But it's selling a phantom, and I don't think it would have possibly worked without the sort of capitalist mythology and the fact that doing this like basically con job on the population allowed him to become fabulously rich and therefore famous and powerful. You would have had to do it properly if you had started this in a cooperative fashion or a socialist fashion.
In contrast, let's look at S Group again briefly. You have relative to the GDP, right? A business that's like 4 times as big as Walmart, again, relative to the GDP of Finland versus Walmart in the US. And you have nobody probably, I don't know if anyone knows who the head of SOK is or if like there's no fame involved there.
Crook.
But what you do have is, yeah, you don't have a crook in charge.
His name is actually Crook. Yeah.
That's his name. His name is Crook.
He should be running Tesla. Yeah.
But you have, a widely successful business that I think even doesn't want to like grow a bigger market share than the 50% or whatever. It's like happy and content where it is. And I think it's not unrelated to not just the tax system, but also their public education makes Finns, according to most kind of studies, the number 1 place in the world for education, right? Yeah. Like they top, and that's probably related to like their democracy and their ability to join in and vote at 25% levels for S Group management decisions. And you were there. Maybe as we're winding down, we can have some more anecdotes from your trip here, right? Like you saw kids playing out and about like crazy, right? This is like one of the first things you told me. It's like there's kids playing everywhere outside all the time.
Yeah, apparently
this is part of their education system. Is like kids go play.
Yeah, there's no snow days apparently in Finland. So rain or snow or sleet or whatever, they're out there. I think the cutest thing is these big packs of like kindergartners, and they all wear the same thing, like these high visibility vests and like galoshes and like rain pants. And they're all just like splashing around in the puddles and stuff like that. But yeah, Finnish children are much more visible on the street. I think in part because of just a sort of higher trust society and the fact that like there's virtually no pedestrian deaths in Helsinki ever.
Right.
And
because that's the other thing you notice is everyone drives slower.
Yeah, everyone drives real slow. A lot of cyclists, it's all these cobblestone streets or brick or rough stone streets. So you have to drive slow. And you could you could just about walk right into any crosswalk without even looking, and people would stop for you.
Did you notice this? When I was in Stockholm, I noticed kids like literally just not necessarily in packs, but like a 7-year-old child on his or her own wandering around Stockholm, presumably headed somewhere on purpose, but like in the heart of the city without, presumably a care in the world that there's any danger in doing that.
Yep.
Right? And this, coupled with public parks and this feeling that there is a community, a broader place that is safe for everyone to move within, including little kids, right?
Yeah, it's definitely saw, groups in ones and twos, or three or four from, I would guess, around 7 or 8 up to, teenagers, of course. Yeah, just wandering around or sitting at a cafe, or going like carrying like sports equipment and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just like totally accepted that kid, you got to be independent at some point. Of course, the kindergartners had like minders, they'd have 3 or 4 adults like herding them around. Some of it's pretty funny. They'd have like these big wagons. They're like pushing them down the sidewalk with like 6 of them sitting like 2 and 2 and 2 and just pushing like it's sort of
tremendous
kindergarten size SUV for hand pushed.
What other public goods did you notice? Because we can compare notes. I was in Copenhagen and Stockholm and Berlin. What did you like that you saw that was kind of refreshing in terms of the structure of Helsinki and some of the things on offer that were state-run?
Got a great public transit system. They have a great state, here's your more classic socialist institution, state-run railway that I took a train up to Vasa. That's apparently, I don't know how you pronounce it. I just heard that over the intercom like 50 times as I was coming up to the station. But that was, 4 hours ish. So quite a bit faster than driving. Super, probably not as good as like Spanish trains. There's just not that big of a population, but it was super efficient and clean, and like everything was scheduled down to like the second almost. It's like, okay, we're leaving at 5:10 and we're leaving at 5:10.
And was it pretty reasonable, the cost?
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. It was like 30 euros, but it's a long distance.
Took a 4-hour trip.
Yeah, I would probably less than
each way or round trip.
Each way, yeah. I would guess like less than half the cost for a similar Amtrak trip. I mean, maybe, it can be cheaper.
Absolutely.
But I was also buying it at the very last minute too. So that could have had something to do with it.
Sure. Yeah. I also saw a picture on a beach, which I presume was by a lake. There was a public workout like situation on the beach. Like you could anyone could go and lift weights and work out. Yeah. Well, tell us about that.
Yeah, it's like a sort of gold beach type situation that apparently these exist in the US, it's like, but it was a full on, sort of weatherproofed like weightlifting machine. So they had like a bench press, but there's like a lever on it with a movable weight that you could slide back and forth to adjust the resistance. All very, very like new and well maintained. And yeah, people are out there using it for free. No, nothing.
That's the thing. The well-maintained is key, right? Yeah. Because like in the States, you have sometimes state provided things, but they're not well-maintained and they go to shit. And then that reminds people of this kind of really fake distinction that like, oh, government or state run things are shitty. And that means they're for poor people who can't afford the nice things that private corporations offer. Right. And whereas like that doesn't have to be the way it has to be at all. I saw in Copenhagen this great kind of sign right by the stairs, which was, walking around the city. It said, like toilets, and it said free, and it had the hours that there are attendants, like the state provides people to attend and maintain them. So it's both like clean and supervised. So it's safe and tidy and free for anyone who's wandering around and needs to pee. I thought that was amazing. Those are like the little things. It's like, oh yeah, you don't have to pay for everything. You don't have to privatize everything. It's nice to just have like anyone and everyone can use things and have their basic needs taken care of. How wonderful.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't see so many of those. I guess I wasn't really looking for them, but yeah, I do remember in the Faroes, there were public toilets everywhere. There was like I don't know if they had a plague of people pissing in the street like decades ago or what. But yeah, all over the place.
Yeah. In Berlin, you tend to have these like enclosed ones where you use a card or coins or something, and it's like €1 or 50 cents or something like that. Or in a mall, you pay 50 cents, that kind of thing.
I do remember in Frankfurt that I visited one time that they just have like a urinal, like just straight up on the sidewalk.
I've seen those too.
Like,
yes, that's right. Yeah, that's free. That's definitely free.
Not enclosed at all, just like a stainless steel.
Semi-enclosed.
Yeah. That, you know, that's maybe better. It did smell like piss, but it, you know, maybe better than nothing.
At least the rest of the street did not.
Yeah. Some guy comes by every couple of days, with like a bucket of water and just sort of I don't know. But, yeah, I think the public good I appreciated the most just was like the sort of vibe of this being like a great place to live. Ethos. You walk around or bike around, and it just
safe and friendly.
Yeah, feels very safe and friendly, and as like a society, you know, not the American like every man for himself.
People look out for each other.
The devil take the hindmost. It was like constantly, you know, making eye contact with drivers and people letting you in, or when you're driving, people letting you in and actually following the goddamn speed limit for once. And you just feel it's just like a very nice, very polite, tidy, and it feels like, you know, everyone's looking out for each other. And you appreciate that. You appreciate that.
It's nice to know that under capitalism that can be the overriding ethos of an entire place.
Yeah. And I would say to the extent that you have the whole society, you know, like big chunks of the economy dominated by like just explicitly non-capitalist enterprises in terms of their ownership structure, at least, you know, this is not how Marx would say capitalism works. You know, they have made significant strides in getting past capitalism. They really have, you know, and you can see it fucking works. It's right there. And it's not like the caricature. I mean, you were just describing it's like Costco, where you have like thousands of different products and different, so, you know, the supposed thing that capitalism only does, which is to give you 27 different kinds of Coca-Cola, which I don't think we need, but that you still have a lot of that kind of thing coupled with the stability, and all the benefits of, you know, not risking people's lives, you know, and not making people have to be so cutthroat. And that's a nice thing to see. So I'm glad that your trip paid off and was last question, anything that really surprised you that you didn't expect when you went there, or that was unanticipated, I should say. It did. One thing I did see more was a lot of hot people playing volleyball on the beach. I did not expect volleyball to be a big, but I went to that gym and like 2 or 3 times, walking through it and actually using it a couple of times. And every time there were people playing volleyball out there in the sand. I was like, damn, I have Finland. So it's nothing wrong with that. It's more summery than you might suppose. Way to go, Finland. Yes. I think that's, you know, up in those Northern European countries, they don't see a lot of sun the rest of the year. So when it comes to summer, they go full out, and we can learn from them in that, we should be taking advantage of the sun whenever we can. And, being hot and playing volleyball sounds good too. Yeah. Seize the day. It's that simple. That's it. All right. Well, maybe we'll talk more about our travels in Northern Europe in another episode, but this was good. Yeah. So thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back sooner than before with some more something. But in the meantime, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.